Welcome to Your Brand Amplified, the podcast where we interview marketers, publicists, and brands to learn their stories, what makes them tick, and tips and tricks that make a difference. Welcome to another episode of Your Brand Amplified. I am Annika Jackson here with Kevin Palmieri. Kevin, you are the CFO, founder, and co-host of Next Level University, and you are all about the self-improvement journey. And this all started with your own journeys. Let's just get right in and talk about how you went from having it all to rock bottom's basement, as you put it, and
yes.
back again.
Yeah. So first of all, thank you for having me. I appreciate it very much. Yeah, let's get right into it. So I always give a little bit of context just because I think it's important to understand what you're hearing and who it's coming from. So the very beginning of my journey, I was raised by my mom and my grandmother. Didn't meet my dad until I was 27. And obviously that has positive and negative effects on a young man. So I always just throw that out there just for context. Other than that, not a lot happened in my childhood that's newsworthy. The interesting part of life started after high school when all my friends went away to college. I was like, I don't know what I want to do, but college is not what I want to do. So I'm not going to do that. I'm going to figure out my own life and kind of go at my own pace. So I ended up job hopping from the time where I was pretty much 16 until 22. 23. And I ended up getting this very unique job in an industry called weatherization. All that means is we go into buildings and we make them more energy efficient. That's kind of the best way to explain it, right? So if you looked at me a few years later, I'm 25 years old. It looks like every decision I made was the right decision because now I'm quote unquote successful. And my girlfriend is a model. I have a sports car. I just competed in and won my bodybuilding show. So I quite literally, I had it all. I had all the things that you could ever want. But I was a very insecure man. I was not confident. I was not excited for my future. I was not fulfilled. I didn't understand myself, right? Everything looked really good from the outside, but inside did not feel good. So one day my girlfriend came to me and she said, "Hey, I want to chase my dreams. I want to move to California from New Hampshire where we lived, and I want to chase my dreams." And in my scarcity, I gave her every reason in the world why she shouldn't do it. Just, I was afraid of being left behind. That was pretty much it in a nutshell. And believe it or not, a couple of weeks later, she left me. I got my big fear. It came true.
Yeah.
And again, she did exactly what she should have. That was the right thing for her. I'm glad she did that, right? God forbid I hold somebody back from chasing their dreams. That's not what I want to do. So when she leaves, I start trying to dip my toes into self-improvement. I realize that for most of my life, the problems I've had, I've been at least 50% a part of them. So it's not like everybody else's fault that I'm not happy and everybody else's fault that these relationships keep falling through. So I start to practice self-improvement. I start to practice positive affirmations, but I then convince myself that money, it's the answer to everything. So this stint in self-improvement was pretty short. And then I said, all right, I need to make as much money as humanly possible. That's the answer. And then I doubled down on that. So the next year starts, I get a promotion at my company and now I'm a foreman, which means I'm running a bunch of jobs, which is good. That's in alignment with what I want to do. So that year was the busiest year that company has ever had. And I spent 10 months out of the next 12 months on the road because most of our contracts were in other states. So I'm living in hotels, I'm working out in different gyms, I'm in different states, different towns, different schools, but that's directly in alignment with what I wanted. So I'm happy with it. So we got to the end of the year, final pay stub in hand. Did I do it? I wanted to make $100,000. Did I do it? And I made $100,000 at 26 with no college degree. But I had another one of those moments where I realized that I put so much emphasis on the external to fix the internal, and that didn't happen and actually somehow got worse. I don't know how that happened. So I realized in that moment that for most of my life, I lived unconsciously. The opposite of unconscious is hyperconscious. Start a podcast called the Hyperconscious Podcast, 2017. I fall in love with podcasting. As I fall out of love with my job, I am miserable. I don't want to do it anymore. I hate it. I don't care about the money. I'm calling out. I'm leaving work early. I'm showing up late. It's just miserable. And eventually, throughout the course of that year, I just got depressed and I was anxious and I was just struggling. And it got to the point where I was in a hotel room 6 hours from home. My alarm clock went off at 5:15, 5:30 in the morning, sat up, slid to the edge of the bed, lacing up my work boots like I did every other day. But that morning, it felt like there was 10 televisions on in my head at the same time, and every single one was on a different station. One saying, "You're stuck here forever." You can't leave. It's so good here. You would be crazy to leave this job. If you did leave, what would your friends say? If you did leave, what would your family say? And if you do leave, do you really think you're going to be a podcaster? That's what we're going to fall into. And in that moment, I felt that if I was to take my life, I would take my problems with me. And I ended up reaching out to somebody very close to me. He's now my business partner and the CEO of our company, which is beautiful how it all connects. And I explained to him what was going on. And he said, hey man, he was very into self-improvement. Over the last couple of years, your awareness has changed a ton, but your environments have remained the same, right? I think it's time for you to change your environment. So I ended up leaving that job 3 or 4 months later and then going full time into podcasting and coaching and speaking and turning this quote unquote hobby of a podcast into what it is today over the next however many years it was, 5-6 years.
Wow. There's so many things in your story that I resonate with. I come from a family that's very highly educated, and I did have my mom and my dad there. But, I think everybody has their family struggles and things that they deal with. I just worked on an event for a client. The event's called FatherCon. It's about how fathers have to be involved in their kids' lives because it just helps mitigate so many issues when you have those healthy relationships modeled for you.
Yeah.
But I ended up not going to college, dropping out, working, making 6 figures, trying to figure out my what next, all of that journey. And there are so many things that you said that I think everybody in our audience will resonate with. And you can't use that external validation to solve things if you haven't worked on yourself. And that is such an important lesson and something people need to learn earlier. I mean, you did learn at an early age, which is very unusual because most of us, I think, maybe go on a little bit of that journey, but we don't get that aha moment until much, much later. So kudos to you.
Thank you.
And for reaching out to somebody, right? And not doing that because I think when you're feeling that depressed and unmotivated, you're not thinking about the effect that your actions are going to take on other people in your life that are important to you and that love you and that would be there for you. So the fact that you were able to reach out to somebody and get that validation, that love and that nudge and go, okay, you know what? I'm going to stay here. Today's not my day to die. All of those things. Yeah. So let's talk about that. So you went on this podcast journey and I love podcasting because I get to meet wonderful people like you and get to meet people I would never meet if I'm just walking down the street or staying in my own little bubble, right? So what has podcasting meant for you and what kinds of things are you getting into with self-development? Because I think there are so many, positive affirmations, subliminals, meditation, seeking. There's so many different journeys you can go on. So I'd love to hear about some of your experiences.
Yeah. So for me, it means everything. It was interesting because very early in the journey, you could tell people were like, oh, it's kind of cute. You have a podcast and I'm sure it's fun and all that. And it's like, no, I mean, at this point we have a 17-person team. It's like, this is a real business. There's a lot going on behind the scenes, but I also understand you would never know that unless you were another podcaster or a business owner. So it makes sense. But yeah, for me, it means everything. The ability to speak into a microphone and have people in 150 countries hear it. It's like, I'm just a kid from a small town who had a big dream. That's it. I was nothing special. I never saw any of this. I just worked really hard and it gave me purpose and it gave me fulfillment. And it really made me feel like I was part of something bigger. And I never really felt that before. And I also have the pride of I created this. That, not in the ego way, but I had a moment last night where we had to record 3 episodes because we do 7 a week. So we had to hammer out 3 last night. And when I got off, I was like, I love the fact that we're the bosses. We're the ones who have to say, hey, we got to record these episodes. They have to get done. I love that. That opportunity is amazing. So it means so much to me. I get to pour into an amazing community and I'm forever grateful for that. And what we love to talk about, because we really have focused on understanding who our audience is. Obviously, that's huge in any brand.
Yes.
Our audience, believe it or not, is primarily female. It's primarily females who struggle with low self-worth. Low self-belief, setting boundaries, toxic relationships, that being consistent, self-discipline, that type of stuff. We talk about health, we talk about wealth, we talk about life, and we talk about love. Well-rounded.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of places you can go to learn more about making money, but making money is not the problem if you have a money block. If you have a money block, there's some other stuff that has to be uncovered first. So we try to take self-improvement and then go deeper. And then leave everybody with a deeper understanding of themselves and a more accurate understanding of what tactics will help them at the end of the episode. That's really, really, really what we built our business on is we want to help people change their identities. That's really the ultimate goal in the long run.
Yeah. And then with that, so you have the podcast, you also offer a workshop. You said you do speaking engagements to help teach these things to people as well.
Yeah. We do live events. We do group coaching. So we've done 9 rounds of group coaching. So 90 people have graduated our group coaching programs. Right now, Alan, I think, has 30 one-on-one clients. I have 30 some odd clients in my podcast coaching. So there's just a lot. We realized pretty quickly that as a podcast, you kind of have to diversify where you're making money. Because unless you want to run ads and sponsorships, which we're just not interested in, you have to find a way to serve your audience at the deepest level.
Yeah.
Then it got to the point where we were like 800 episodes in. People ask me for advice all the time. I should probably start figuring out what podcast coaching looks like. Okay, cool. We got our website built by somebody on our team. Okay, now we can build websites. So it's interesting how it evolved from serving our direct community to then serving the people who saw what we were doing and said, hey, I want help creating what you've created. So it really helped us kind of diversify. But yeah, coaching, live events, retreats, courses, all that stuff we offer. Yeah.
Yeah. And that intentionality is so important, because I think about even when you get offered that dream job, or you think that big opportunity is coming up, if you have money block, those opportunities might fall through, and they might present themselves in a different way later when you're ready for that message or you're ready to receive. I'm backtracking a little bit. I teach graduate students at USC. And one of the things that I have them do for my fall class, which is branding and PR, is listen to the podcast. And the episodes that resonate the most with them seem to be the ones not necessarily about branding, but really about this kind of stuff, about how do you really live authentically? How do you find your voice? How do you get over those hurdles, whether it's emotional, mental, you don't feel you're enough, you have those money blocks, you don't know how to use your voice to get that promotion you want or get the ideal job. So I know that this episode is going to resonate very highly with my audience, but I think that's a really important thing to think about. And in my world, I think I've mostly seen women live in this space, not as many men who can do it as authentically as I can tell you do.
I appreciate that. That means the world. Here's the interesting thing. So when I left my job, I had $10,000 in the bank and I had access to $35,000 of credit cards. So in my mind, it was like, we're okay. We don't have to make money right away. Little did I know, like, yeah, we probably should focus on that. But in retrospect, my business partner and I, we focused on our character. I mean, I know it probably sounds cliche and it probably sounds cheesy, but like we were in the studio, which was his sister's old bedroom at his mother's house. That was our first podcast studio. And we were talking about, hey, we have to be better men. We're going to have a lot of responsibility to make sure that we are being the best men humanly possible, not only for our families and our future families, but for our community. We are in a very high responsibility place where we get told a lot of secrets and we have a lot of stories that we get told. And like, there's a lot of negativity that you could put into that if you weren't a character-driven human being. So I appreciate that, because number one, it's the thing that we've worked on probably the longest. And I just think at a deep level, again, going back to the brand, I'll connect it to brand.
Yeah.
I want people to feel safe.
Yeah.
That's our brand. If you don't feel safe with us, I can't help you. And I think this is the interesting thing that we have that a lot of other self-improvement companies don't. I don't believe in myself either. That's the interesting thing, is I'm not going to be like a super masculine energy saying, hey, get it together. I don't care. Don't sleep. Do it anyway. Like, that's just not the way. That doesn't resonate with me.
Yeah.
I always try to say, like, I understand what it's like not to believe in yourself. 100,000%. What's one little thing we can do? Not, you should already be a millionaire. You should already be making X. Like, no, that doesn't help. That's not helpful. So that's the interesting, unique approach we have based on our audiences. I don't want to be like other potential hyper-masculine self-improvement brands. I just don't think it serves the purpose we're trying to serve.
Yeah. And I think to that point as well, we get served the same message over and over until we finally take it in and realize it, right? And that's what I hear in your story too. You kept getting these little things saying, yeah, this is great, but this isn't the life that's for you. I'm sure it seemed very glamorous to people that you had your dream car, that you were making all this money, that you were traveling all the time. But people don't realize that's not really a life. As you said, you're living in hotel rooms. You don't get to form relationships with people consistently. You're working out in different gyms, and it's just work, work, work. And so that doesn't leave you time to fill yourself up and to feel that self-worth outside of just that job.
Yeah.
So I've seen in my own life also the patterns of having the same kind of relationship over and over again until I realize, oh, this is the kind of relationship I'm attracting. This isn't what I want, whether it's personal, professional, lover, friend, whatever. Right. And so these are all things that I think people can work on. And as you said, take those little baby steps that you need to. You don't have to do it all at once, but every incremental change is going to lead to more positivity and to opening yourself up to be able to attract the positive, the good, the light.
Yeah. The more you see, the more you can ultimately determine what your vision of success is.
Yeah.
I think that's all it is. Like, I found success. Oh, that's not it. All right, let me go try something else. Oh, that's not it. You know, the interesting thing is, I believe now more than I've ever believed that fulfillment is the goal. I really believe that, because here's the thing. I could take a picture in front of a $200,000 car in a mansion and you might assume I'm happy.
Right.
I might be happy. I might have bouts of happiness. I might have that. But what a picture on social media cannot show you is how fulfilled somebody is.
Right.
That's why I think a lot of us get hoodwinked into thinking, oh, I need this because this looks like happiness. When in reality, a nice car might make you happy. It might give you a dopamine spike. It might feel better to drive it, but that's not going to fulfill you. That's not growth and contribution. That's not purpose. That's not alignment. That's not giving back to something greater than yourself. So what I always suggest is try to find fulfillment. What does fulfillment mean to you? If you don't know yet, that's okay. That's a good place to start.
Yeah. And this is a perfect segue because I was going to ask, how does someone find their purpose? These are all things that I'm really big on because as a branding person and marketer and publicist, whatever I'm working with somebody, I always want them to start with that. Like, what is their purpose? What are they doing differently? Or what's making them full of joy that then helps them fulfill other people's needs as well?
Yeah, I think a lot of us, when we hear that question, we automatically think seek. I need to find my purpose, which means I need to search for it. I can give a couple questions and I will. But what I always say is I think we need to reflect.
Yeah.
I think we need to look into our past because your past has hints. So here's an interesting thing. I used to drive a truck. When I drove a truck, I used to listen to the radio. When I listened to the radio, I said, imagine if you could talk into a microphone for 4 hours a day and get paid. That would be pretty cool. I would love that. Interesting. Then after that, I remember before Facebook Live was a thing, I used to record videos on my laptop and then post them to Facebook. Wow. One of them was, do you deserve to be happy? My thesis was, I believe you deserve what you work for. That was my first ever podcast episode, long before I even knew what podcasting was, right? Yeah. Interesting. Connect that dot. It got to the point where I would literally, and I know this is kind of weird, conflict of interest, but I would date someone after I dated that person. If we parted ways, they would reach out to me for relationship advice. Oh. As weird as that might sound, I would coach that person on the relationship. Interesting. Yeah. Why was I doing that? Because I want to help. I want to add value. Yeah. Eventually, it gets to the point where I think your vehicle becomes revealed. Yeah. So I was interviewed on a YouTube show. Coincidentally enough, it was my co-host show. Right? That's interesting. And I said after that, imagine if you could do this for a living. Imagine if you could talk into a microphone about self-improvement with the goal of helping others. Imagine if you could do that for a living. My friend there said, I had another friend there and he said, you can. There's people that do that. Vehicle scene. Boom, right? Off to the races. I go get the equipment and the podcast is running in however long after all that happens. The reason I share that is because I think for a lot of us, we think we need to find our purpose. I think we need to find our vehicle. I think most of us want to help a unique subset of humans accomplish a unique goal in a unique way. Now, here's a good exercise. Number one, what makes you so incredibly sad that you cannot move forward without addressing it? Somebody I know went to the Great Barrier Reef. She said the Great Barrier Reef is actually the Great Barrier Cemetery. It's not doing so well. And that broke her heart. She is way more conscious about the environment than she ever was before. It's part of her purpose. Right? That was revealed to her. What would I catch you talking about on a Friday night if I was just a fly on the wall? That's a good representation of what you love talking about. What is something you are hyper focused on that you don't think the world gets enough attention to? Maybe it's litter in a certain part of the world. Maybe it's underprivilege in another part of the world. Those are a few questions you can ask yourself. But I think for a lot of us, we get stuck the second we go, it happened to me. How do I make this profitable? How do I get paid to do this? How do I make this sustainable? How do I make money? That's the vehicle. I think we all have an idea of our purpose, and most of our purposes come from pain, unfortunately. Yeah.
It's ironic to me a little bit that I teach graduate students about PR and digital marketing, but that was not what I majored in when I eventually did go back to school. My career was very organic and it was those nudges. Like somebody asked me to start promoting events and DJs in Kansas City when I lived there. And then I said, sure. And that parlayed into throwing events, that parlayed into moving to different cities and working for different companies and doing marketing. And all of that stuff was very organic and evolved. And I stepped away from it, but now I'm back in it because this is really what I'm supposed to be doing.
Yeah.
And so it was there the whole time. Yeah. Right. I just didn't necessarily know how to monetize it properly. Sometimes I still don't know how to. Sometimes I still make mistakes with that stuff. Of
course.
But it's all a journey and it's amazing. And then to the point that you mentioned about being on, recording videos and putting them on Facebook before Facebook Live was a thing and listening to the radio and wishing that you could just speak into a mic for 4 hours and get paid. I remember I hosted a show like 2017 to 2019 that was on the radio and on Facebook Live. And then that turned into somebody asked me to podcast for them, like for their brand. And then that turned into, why am I doing it for them? I should just do it for myself.
Right.
Yeah. And it turned into this beautiful journey where I meet amazing people every time I get to do a Zoom, every time I'm doing an interview for somebody else's podcast or having people on my podcast.
Yeah.
And it's opened up this whole incredible world of ideas and relationship that I wouldn't have otherwise. And I still don't know exactly where it's going to go, but it's about that journey.
Yeah. I think your purpose is the string that you pull the longest.
Yeah.
It's like that thing that's always there. It's like, if only I could do that. If only I could do that. If only I could do that. But yeah, to your point, I think a lot of us get stuck when it's, how could I ever bring this passion into the real world? That's where I think a lot of us get stuck. And I think many of us have our P's in the wrong order. We think we should do something profitable and convince ourselves we're passionate about it. I think a lot of us do that. Again, me in a nutshell. And then if you reverse that, if you find something that you are so passionate about that you jump in the pool and you figure out how to swim and you can turn that into something profitable, your life will be challenging because it's going to be challenging to do that, but it will be more fulfilling. I am convinced of that because a lot of people, they jump in the pool to dive down to the bottom to get as many gold bars as they can so they can get out of the pool. And that's just not sustainable for most of us. But if you jump into the pool and you say, I love it here. Like I need to figure out how to tread water and backstroke, breaststroke. I need to figure out all this. I think that'll lead to a very fulfilling life, I believe.
Yeah. So let's talk about consistency. Because I know that's one of the things that's on brand for you. So what is consistency? Why is it so important? And how do people achieve it?
Yeah. So consistency, I think a lot of people assume one thing. They assume consistency equals positive. My definition of consistency is doing something repeatedly. Right, wrong, or indifferent, consistency is doing the same behavior over and over and over and over and over again. Why is it important? I mean, here's the thing. If you're building a business, if you're building anything, brand, house, road, nothing happens in the first day.
Right.
From day to day, progress is invisible. It does not even seem to exist. But from month to month and year to year and decade to decade, progress is impossible to miss. That is why consistency is so important. The first podcast episode you do, you're not going to be good. The first client you work with, you're probably not going to know exactly what you're doing. The second one, you'll be a little bit better. The third, the fourth, the fifth, the sixth. That's one reason, because you're going to learn things you never would. You're going to have time under tension of what you're practicing, which is something you cannot replicate. And here's the interesting thing. I always use the video game analogy. On the first level, you might find a hammer, and it's not a real hammer, but it's like, when I ask this question to the guest, it always gets them super emotional. Interesting. You might take that and you might eventually get to the point where in level 10, episode 10, you get to interview your favorite person in the world and you get to ask them that question. And then they say, oh my goodness, nobody's ever asked me that before. And then something happens and they have you at their event or whatever. You can't see at level 1 what's going to happen at level 10.
Right.
The only way to ever see what happens at level 10 is to get there. And I mean, that is the importance of consistency in a nutshell. How do you build it? You create necessity. So I said this to my wife recently. I said, hey, I need you to help me with something. She's like, okay, what's up? And I said, I'm going to give you $100 bill. I literally have it on my table because I talk about it so much. $100 bill. And I'm going to go to the gym 7 times this week. If I don't, I need you to rip the $100 bill up in front of me.
Wow.
And she was like, absolutely not. Not going to do that. And I said, babe, I'm not going to miss. Like, even the fact that I'm having you do this is just me creating more necessity and more accountability. And she said, okay, cool. I'll do it for you. Obviously, I hit the gym 7 days in a row and I got my $100 back. Cool. Accountability and necessity is one of the reasons we're not more consistent, because number one, a lot of us are afraid of public accountability, right? It's in our brand that we will do 7 episodes a week and we will never miss. We've never missed. It's in our brand. We can't miss, right? I don't want to let down every single listener who we told we wouldn't let down. Right. That is public accountability 101.
Yeah.
Necessity, there has to be more downside for you not doing than there is for you doing. So we always say, like, a commitment device. One way to be more consistent, make a verbal commitment with somebody that says, hey, if I don't do blank X amount of times by blank, I'm going to donate $100 to a charity I do not believe in. If you don't believe in the tobacco industry, okay, cool. There's necessity. You don't want to give them your money, right? All right, cool. Get after it, right? There has to be some perceived pain or discomfort for when it comes to not accomplishing what you want. That's a really good way to get things moving. And then when you have momentum, it's a little bit easier to stay consistent, but you have to have the awareness of what is consistency going to bring you in the long run as well. That's big.
Yeah, you said a couple of things. I'm like, I need to just turn that into a quote and put that and send that to every client, because I think when people want to start working with marketers or publicists, they expect immediate result. And we always say, no, this is a long game. We may be able to get you a big press push, a big interview month 1, but more likely it's going to be month 3, month 4, month 5, month 6, because we have to continuously get your message out there. We have to make sure we're getting the right message, the right person at the right time. And it has to be a consistent process. It can't just be one and done. And I find myself getting in trouble because I get excited to help people with their projects and their event is in 3 weeks. That's not enough time realistically. So I'm like taking this in myself and going, okay, my consistent thing there needs to be to make sure that they know what the roadmap really is and to say, no, I'm sorry, I can't help you. Maybe somebody else can, because I'm not going to be able to deliver the results that either one of us wants.
Right. I've turned clients away.
Yeah.
I want to get 100,000 downloads this year. It's like, it ain't going to happen. It's not going to happen. Or like I've had people come to me and say, I need X result by X date. It's like, that's not how this works.
Yeah.
That's not how this works. And I've seen a lot of people that go and then they pay for views. And it's like, that's not really accomplishing the ultimate goal that you're trying to get. You're actually further off. So that's a really hard thing. There's 3 reasons from what I've seen over how the years and just studying humans and stuff, 3 reasons people don't succeed. 1, false expectations. 2, wrong approach. 3, skewed time perspective. Those are like the big 3 things. If you're going to run, if Annika calls me up and says, hey, Kev, we're going to go for a run. I'm going to say, number 1 thing, how far are we running? That's really what I need to know so I can set realistic expectations, create an approach, and understand the time perspective. Yeah. If we're running a mile, I'm going to run that thing drastically different than I'm going to run 26.
Right.
So I just think that's the awareness in the beginning so you can set the expectations is super important.
So as somebody who's been in the podcast game for quite a while, who, has a very successful podcast, what have been the changes that you've seen in the years that you've been doing podcasting, besides a more crowded marketplace, even though as podcasters, we know that most people do maybe a handful of episodes and then quit. But I'd love to hear your perspective on that. And then do you see podcasting continuing to evolve and grow and become more and more important in people's lives and in the media landscape?
Yeah, it has changed drastically because from what I've seen, social media, you don't get the same results you did from social media. So all I mean by that is social media is still drastically important for a podcast. But I remember we used to get shares every day.
Yeah.
Every day it was like, this person shared your podcast. Blah, blah, blah. It was all over the place. Although we've like exponentially grown in listens, we don't nearly have as many of that. And I don't know if it's because social media is a noisier place. People are less likely to share what they're into. It's self-improvement. So self-improvement isn't super cool. That's one thing I've seen is the idea and the tactic behind social media has changed drastically. It's really good to throw up content of your podcast because you're brand marketing, right? Do I know how many people come from that? No, it's not direct. I don't know. But what I do know is social media is the best place in the world to build relationships with your audience. I've seen that work very well. I mean, I'll have 2 clients, client A, client B. Client A, I don't have time to build relationships on social media. Client B, I am all in on building relationships on social media. Client B wins every time. Not close. It's not close because it's almost like with a podcast, you don't really get to connect with your audience unless you go connect with your audience.
Yeah.
You don't know who's listening, right? Unless they come out and tell you. I call it self-identification. So you have to create as many opportunities to self-identify as possible. But yeah, social media has changed a lot. I think the landscape of ads is going to do a lot for podcasters. I think the people who don't use ads are going to be in a smaller bucket and therefore sought after more. I really do believe that.
Okay.
I think that the ad thing, it's anytime something is new, obviously the pendulum swings from like no ads to maybe too many ads to figuring out what the sweet spot is. But I mean, think of it this way. YouTube Premium. I pay for YouTube Premium, so I don't have to listen to ads. That'll probably happen at some point on the podcast app, I would guess. And then I think it's just continuing to go video.
Yeah.
We see so much short form content. I'm sure at some point Apple's probably going to have some sort of video. I feel like they'd have to at some point. So just the importance of creating content, capturing it in video form and sharing it. I don't know if that'll ever go out of style. I think that's getting more and more valuable and important. And if you're not doing that, it's very hard to keep up at this point.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. I was speaking to somebody yesterday who has a podcast as well on branding, and they were telling me about some of the pitches they get from PR people and how some of them, it's like the person obviously didn't even listen to the podcast. They didn't write anything about how their person would be the right guest for that podcast. So I think there's a lot of education that still needs to happen with marketers and with publicists as to here is how you pitch to be on a podcast. Here's how you find the right audience and all the steps you need to take, because it's not just the spray pray and pray method. You really need to be deliberate and intentional. Again, going back to those words as to making sure that it's the right person that you want to invite them onto your podcast, but also if you're going to be a guest, that it's the right podcast for your brand and for your person.
On the host side, I tell my clients this all the time. I will literally get off a podcast and be like, hey, you never should have interviewed me on the questions you interviewed me on. It's just not relevant to your audience. Because at the end of the day, you're solving a unique problem for a unique person in a unique way. It's my job as a guest to solve that problem in the way that I would or add value to it. So I think the really good hosts are getting to the point now where it's like, I don't care who you are, how big you are, or like the access that you might grant me. You're not what's best for my audience. And if you're not what's best for my audience, you're not what's best for the brand. And I think that's a really hard chasm to cross for many of us because we all want that big interview or whatever it is. But we have to understand value is contextual to our audience. Value is extremely contextual to the subset of the audience you're serving.
If you look at influencer marketing, or if you have a big athlete who you're paying hundreds of millions of dollars to promote your product, that's great, but they're not going to be talking about it except in that realm of what they're being paid to promote, how they're being paid to promote. Whereas if you have somebody who might have a less of an audience, but they are really genuine and they are the right audience, they're going to do everything they can to promote the episode they were on because they are grateful. They're excited that they were on it and to have their voice heard. And so those are big things that I think a lot of us have to struggle with as well. When we're looking at like that big guest, they're not going to promote the podcast episode. Those other guests will, but we're just one of millions of asks that they're getting. So
that's a really great point. That's something I say all the time where a lot of people haven't understood that. Number one, they're on so many shows that they couldn't possibly share all the content. Like I did 450 shows last year. So like that's a piece and a half of content. And I do my best to share. If somebody tags me, I share it. But the other thing too is like people will send me a Google Drive folder filled with content. It's like, number one, I have my own content. And number two, I don't have time to go download a bunch of content and then decide what's the best and then share it. Just tag me.
Yeah. So thank you for saying that, because I know it's one thing that a lot of podcast coaches teach or try to share is you need to have this many pieces of content from every episode and you share them out the day of the episode, 3 weeks later, and then you share this and it's a lot. And if that's all you do, fantastic, right? But if, I mean, even you have a podcast, yes, but you do a lot of other things around it. So you don't have time just to create all the content and just share it out all the time.
I'm a personal brand. Like for me, the perspective is, I say this all the time, and I'm curious to your take on this. I will share pictures of my cats, not because my cats have anything to do with the podcast. They have nothing to do with the podcast. I love my cats and they're part of my family. If Annika comes across my social media page and says, oh, I love cats, I'm going to follow Kev. 2 months later, oh, wow, he's got a podcast. Oh, interesting. It's about whatever, Next Level University. That's awesome. Let me check this out. Cool. Now, because you resonated with cats, you resonate with me because that's my brand. So now just quickly, I would say that the more content you can share, the better. But I think a lot of people are just like, I don't know, quality and quantity are valuable. And you got to make sure the stuff you're sharing is actually quality, not just like, I'm going to send this person 15 pictures to share. It's like, well, that doesn't really do as much as maybe one video would. So there's a lot of things that go to that.
Yeah, definitely. And even finding that for my own social media was my personal. And then I'm just going to use the same account for my business. And then, yes, my audience resonates somewhat with that, but also they're used to seeing me in a different light in terms of the other things I do in my life. And that's still the content. The more personal content is the stuff that resonates with people. So I'm now looking at like, okay, how do I make that switch back to, even again, as marketers, it's something that we're always having to look at and explore for our own brands too.
You're always going to have to try something new. I think that's same as a seasoned podcaster, quote unquote, with 1,300 episodes. It's like, I'm still trying to figure out what's the best thing and how does this affect this? It's a never ending pursuit.
Yeah. Well, this has been an amazing journey, being able to explore your journey and get some really great advice. I just have a couple more questions.
Please.
One is, a lot of people listening are entrepreneurs. What is your most powerful piece of advice for an aspiring or early entrepreneur?
2 things. 1, make learning a non-negotiable. Learning about yourself and learning about whatever you don't know yet. That's number 1. Like, do not miss a day of learning. You will thank yourself in 5 years, I promise. And then number 2, be very, very, very aware of what you are wildly good at and what you are wildly bad at, because those are the 2 things that are going to bring you or keep you from the promised land. So double down on what you're really good at, shore up weaknesses. If that's the season you're in, delegate weaknesses if you can potentially. But I've just met a lot of people who are like, yeah, I'm really good at this. And it's like, I don't know if that's it. I don't know if that's really it. Or other people who are like, I'm really bad at this. And it's like, no, you are one of the best speakers I've ever met. Like
Wow.
there's a block there, right? So if you knew you were a great speaker, you'd live your life completely different. Those two things I think are very important for early entrepreneurs.
Yeah. Thank you.
Of course.
And then what's next for you in the world of podcasting? Can people go to your socials or your website to find out about your coaching programs or when you're speaking next?
Yeah. What's next? That's a great question. I don't know. We're going to keep doing what we're doing. And it sounds cliche and boring, but our goal is to get a little bit better every day. That's what I'm after. I'm after just continuous improvement. It's small. You're not going to recognize it until like next year, probably. But that's really what we're focused on. We're focused on growing the team. We're focused on making more profitability so we can run it back into the business. That's our main thing. And now we're kind of in a season where I'm going to go try to do as many podcast speeches as I can. I finally think I'm like over the imposter syndrome of, okay, Kev, at this point, you can add some value to people. So get out there and do it. I'm at that stage now where I'm seeking out podcasts to speak at. And then, yeah, you can find everything on my social media, in our podcast too. We talk about all this stuff, everything, all of our links are in our show notes too. So everything you need is there.
Fantastic. And I'll be putting the links in the show notes for this episode today too. And then do you have a favorite quote or mantra or words that you like to live by?
Yeah, I have two. I don't know if I can just give one anything for some reason. So one is the biggest difference between who you are today and who you want to be is your habits, right? We talked a little bit about consistency. So I think that's appropriate. This is just a good one for me that I think some people just need to hear. I might be the bad guy for saying it, but I got to say it. Are the people in your life the best from your past or the best for your future? Ask yourself that question, because I think a lot of us are surrounding ourselves with people that hold space, not necessarily people that bring us to where we want to get to. So that's a question I wish I would have asked earlier.
We could probably talk another hour about that question alone or that mantra. So Kevin, thank you so much. This has been a real joy to have you on. I see the light and the exuberance in your eyes, and I know that you have a lot of value. I'm going to go follow your podcast because I haven't yet, and give you a good review and start listening to some episodes because I know it'll add a lot of value for me too.
Thank you. I appreciate it very much. This was wonderful. I'm very grateful for your time and the thoughtful questions. So thank you.
Thank you. And thank you to our audience for coming back for another amazing expert guest on Your Brand Amplified. I'll be back again in a few days with another episode. Want more? Check out amplifywithannika.com or follow me on socials at amplifywithannika.